Hi, welcome to the show. Exciting news from Mozambique. There has been a new peace brokered between Frelimo and Renamo, the two factions that have fought a bloody civil war since 1975. More on the background of Mozambique, Professor Langer. So, Mozambique had been the possession of Portugal since the 1400s, but since World War II there had been a growing feeling of nationalism and a want for independence. So, who was the main force behind the revolution? The group that was the most influential in the independence of Mozambique was a group called Frelimo. Originally they were a liberal group who fought against the Portuguese, but eventually they ran out of money and needed to get backed by the communist powers. Now, what was sort of the general course of the war? How did it progress? Well, for most of the war, it was a very low-key resistance, using mostly landmines around the Portuguese encampments and guerrilla warfare to terrorize the Portuguese so that they would stay in their barracks and not travel into the countryside. And it was extremely successful, and by 1967 they actually controlled 1/5 of the entire country. But the Portuguese later on decided that they had had enough, and they sent in a new commander to deal with the Frelimo fighters. And during this operation, they had consulted with the Americans about the tactics in Vietnam, and they used helicopters to dart in and destroy small groups of Frelimo fighters. They nearly won, but it was a much higher intensity of war with a lot more casualties to the Portuguese. And as they were already a somewhat unpopular regime at home, they feared that if too many Portuguese died in this war, that they would lose their support completely. And so it was stopped. And had it been allowed to continue, Portugal might well have held on to Mozambique. So how did Mozambique finally gain independence? Although the Frelimo fighting was a key factor in the liberation of Mozambique, actually the greatest factor of all was the fall of the Salazar fascist government in Portugal during the Carnation Revolution in 1975. When the revolution was successful, a new, much more liberal government came to power, and they felt that Mozambique had a right to be its own country, and so they gave Mozambique to Frelimo. And now we go to our correspondent Ian West, who is in Mozambique, who will summarize the civil war that has been raging there since 1975.
Well, Jared, as you can see, I'm in an old, run-down apartment building in Mozambique. In 1977, shortly after achieving independence from Portugal, Mozambique faced civil war. The ruling party, the Front for Liberation of Mozambique, clashed with the Mozambique Resistance Party until 1992, when a formal peace was declared. Over 900,000 people died in the fighting and from starvation. Clearly Mozambique was not peaceful, as we had hoped, but was rather transformed into a dangerous and unstable country.
So Ian, what exactly divided the country?
The divide amongst the people parallels that of India in the 1940s, just after being liberated from England. Indians were divided into Hindus and Muslims, just as Mozambican people now are divided based on political ideology. Early on in the independence war, a Marxist-Leninist group, the Front for Liberation of Mozambique, established itself as the chief supporter for independence. The party successfully liberated Mozambique, but failed to unite the country. A conservative group, the Mozambique Resistance Group, feared it. This led to years of civil war and ultimately a failed country.
And thanks to Ian West for that informative report about the Mozambique Civil War. Now with me is Alfred Terhune, who wrote the book My Friend the Dog, about his experiences in Mozambique during the war. Now, I gotta be honest, My Friend the Dog, it is a strange title.
It seems that way, but I wrote it about my personal experiences in Mozambique, and when I was there, it's sort of sad, but the only thing I could really rely on was my dog.
That is truly sad. Now, at one point, Frelimo was a communist revolution. Now, how did that occur, and why are they no longer a communist revolution?
Well, initially, when they were breaking free from Portugal's power, they saw, reasonably, the oppression of the Portuguese as a sign that all more Western, I guess, more right-wing governments were tyrannical and oppressive. Clearly they did not want that type of government for their people, so they were a more left-wing government, more liberal government anyway. However, they also realized that once they broke free from Portugal, they were going to have some serious financial difficulties. A very simple solution in the eyes of the Frelimo was to become a communist state, because then they would be able to get money from various other communist governments, such as Soviet Russia and China.
So, what was the United States position during this period?
Well, it was fairly mixed. Obviously, the United States did not approve of the Frelimo government being a communist government, and therefore they did not give them any financial aid. However, they did not support the people who fought against the Frelimo government, the Renamo. And that shows that perhaps they weren't the most completely Marxist government there was. They weren't.
And Renamo was very definitely very conservative. Now, I understand that Renamo was not sponsored by us, but it was sponsored by South Africa and Rhodesia.
Yes, it was. That is part of what made the war between Renamo and the Frelimo go on for as long as it did. Because, while the Frelimo was sponsored by the Soviet Union and China, the Renamo also had sponsors, and that enabled the war to continue for a much longer time.
Why is Frelimo no longer a communist group?
Well, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, they lost pretty much all of their reasoning behind being communist.
Right.
While they're still a left-wing government, they certainly progressed back towards more moderate state of, I guess, existence.
Right.
And that caused the United States to warm up to them, along with the UK and other Western nations.
Right. Albert, you say in your book that the UN had a role to play in sort of brokering the peace between these two warring factions.
Yes. With the Rome General Peace Accords on October 4th of this year, the United Nations managed to create a ceasefire between the current Frelimo government and the Renamo rebellion. It was obviously a very fortunate thing for the people of Mozambique, because it put a stop to the war that has been ceaselessly going on for the last...
Now, I have heard a figure that it was 900,000 people died in this conflict.
That could not even be all of them. It's possible that many more died. It's taken a massive toll on the country in general.
And don't forget to check out Albert's book, My Friend the Dog.
Thank you for having me on this show.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And now we go to Phil Menard, who has a report on the leaders of Frelimo.
On June 25th, 1975, Mozambique finally gained its independence from Portugal after 10 years of fighting. Following their victory, the Marxist Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, or Frelimo Party, took control of the country, led by President Samora Machel. Machel was born on September 29, 1933, in Madragoa, today known as Chilembene, Gaza Province, Mozambique, then known as Portuguese East Africa, into a farm family. As a child, he attended a Catholic missionary school, where he learned about the Portuguese language and culture. At the age of 20, he began to study nursing in the capital of Lourenço Marques, present-day Maputo. While there, he became a political activist advocating Marxism. He joined Frelimo in 1962, abandoning his first wife and 4 children. In 1964, he led Frelimo's first guerrilla attack on the Portuguese. In 1969, he became the commander-in-chief of Frelimo, in addition to marrying his second wife. After the assassination of Frelimo's president, Eduardo Mondlane, in February 1969, Machel assumed the presidency. As president of Mozambique, Machel stayed true to his Marxist ideology. He called for the nationalization of Portuguese plantations and property and the establishment of schools and healthcare for peasants. More importantly, he forced peasants to live in communal villages, which was deeply opposed. However, Frelimo crushed all opposition in a manner reminiscent of Stalin's USSR. As president of Mozambique, Machel stayed true to his Marxist ideology. He called for the nationalization of Portuguese plantations and property and the establishment of schools and healthcare for peasants. More importantly, he forced peasants to live in communal villages, which was deeply opposed. However, Frelimo crushed all opposition in a manner reminiscent of Stalin's USSR, as any and all political dissidents were arrested and killed. He supported the revolutionaries who were attempting to overthrow the white regimes in Zimbabwe, then known as Rhodesia, and South Africa, partially because the ruling parties of these two countries were responsible for funding Frelimo's main political opposition, an armed anti-communist rebel movement known as the Mozambique Resistance Movement, or RENAMO. Despite the fact that the economy began to go downhill and that the Mozambican government had to rely more and more on aid from the Soviet Union, in addition to the ongoing civil war with RENAMO and unpopular policies such as land reform, Machel was relatively popular during his time in office. However, on October 19, 1986, the presidential aircraft was on its way back from an international meeting in Zambia when it crashed near the South African border. Machel was among the 33 dead. Though the circumstances of this accident are somewhat suspicious, nothing has been proven. Machel was succeeded by Joaquim Chissano, who reformed the entire country from Marxism to capitalism and began peace talks with RENAMO.
Well, thanks for tuning in, folks. That was our show about Mozambique.
The RENAMO and the Frelimo were forced to sign treaties. That doesn't sound right.
Don't get out of your depth here. I just want a short answer.
They saw more right-wing governments as imperialist tyrannical powers. And also, they forget to say